Okay, so we have a working demonstration here of developing the hands, and I've got a veil of tone of vine charcoal applied over the whole area of the hands. And I'm gonna subtractively start to remove that. I have my maul stick in place so that I don't smear the veil of tone. I have my kneaded eraser, which has been shaped into a tool, and I start to remove very sensitively at the brightest areas first. I tend to shape the eraser into sort of like a little duckbill, a duckbill kind of a shape, so that I can treat it like a brush uh, and pull across the form with it in a way that's not going to create harsh edges when I when I wipe with the eraser. So we start to tap into how versatile the kneaded eraser can be as a legitimate tool in the rendering process. This is great practice for learning to create variations in value just through subtractive sensitivities with the eraser. And it mimics what we do in indirect painting later on. So we want to put a wash of tone down on the canvas, usually an earth tone wash, which we call an imprimatura. And then we begin to wipe through that while it's wet with a rag, and often referred to as a wipeout. This is the introductory technique to that process. You can see that I changed the shape of the eraser as I go along. I just pinched it to a tighter one as I need to get into a narrower space. But what I should say here is that I'm variating the pressures of removal. So it's very straightforward. If I want a highlight, then we're going to go full force as we take off with the eraser like that. But there's a lot of mid-tone values that are either close to the veil of tone or they are the veil of tone, and we want to preserve them. And here's where you can see I reshaped the eraser back into kind of my duckbill shape, and I'm just half pressure. I'm wiping across the form, trying to preserve some of the veil of tone that's there, and trying to integrate the highlights that I've lifted off and almost blend them right into the veil of tone to get a sense of turning form. And what's nice about this technique in both drawing and painting is that we immediately get, with just one swipe of the eraser or with the brush or with a rag, we get the sense of illuminated form in space. So it's not just form, it's not just illumination, it's also the illusion of space, because the veil of tone seems to imply atmosphere and in a very convincing way. So we automatically cultivate all of those properties in one take of the drawing or the painting. Now, should we need to go back and adjust this later, which is very likely, then we do. But this helps us ease into the modeling of the form. It's a very comfortable way for the artist to slide into all of the activity that will take place in making a more carefully modeled and rendered volume and structure and surface of the form. So you notice I tend to pull out the highlight first, and I really, it gives me a chance to focus in on the graphic character of the highlight. So what shape is the highlight, sort of as a shard, as a graphic, abstract, geometric shape. And then now I'm pulling off of that, or pushing off of that in this case. So I'm blending out the edges. But I'm thinking not just about blending the edge of the shape, I'm thinking about pulling across the form. So everything that we're doing, it tends to be in the character of how a sculptor might think about creating form and volume, structure, plane, three-dimensional properties to the drawing or painting. You may be wondering, will we go back and add in darker darks? And the answer is yes. This is just the preliminary phase of modeling this hand. We're gonna pull out and wipe out, as we're doing now. We're going to add darker darks back in, though not necessarily in that order. We might, before that, put in white chalk to access the highest values in the form. I like to do that because it helps me to key the rest of the drawing. If I can see what my highest lights are of any given form, then I understand where I want to use the paper as a value to represent the form, and I understand all the rest of the values in the form. It tells me how dark the half lights need to be and the dark lights, and
It's 5 o'clock.
There's a little light on the head of the ulna here, and very simple, quiet transition into the adjacent carpal bones. So right now I'm hatching with the eraser just to get the feeling of the turning form. Feel free to make another pass over a form. You know, if you've subtracted and wiped it out once, you can always make another pass if you feel like you've got to key up the value of it. Now I've been working with the eraser here for a few moments, and now I'm going to try a little bit of work with a brush. This is a softer brush, so you've probably seen me work with bristle brushes when it's time to blend the charcoal that's already on the paper. And so the bristle brushes work really well for blending if you want to make a smooth transition like some of the areas I've already completed up here. But a soft brush, like a Sable brush, you can see what's happening is that it's going to act as a remover, or it's going to remove, it's going to be a subtractor of the veil of tone. And it does it in a very soft, hushed way, so that we get nice blended transitions between tones. So this is a subtractive tool, but you can see it's not as powerful as the eraser. So it's something that we turn to when we want to remove, but we don't want to remove all the way. It doesn't go 100%. So I like that about using the soft Sable brush. This is a flat. This isn't a Sable brush, but it looks like I guess mongoose hair, and it's definitely on the softer side of what brush hairs can be. So for blending and pushing charcoal around, we want the bristle brush. But for subtracting, we can get good use out of the softer sable or synthetic sable or mongoose hair. And it sort of helps sweep and blend some of the subtractive measures we've done so far. And you can sneak up on this. Like I've erased for a while. Then I started to blend what I've done with the brush. Come back to it with the eraser again. I'm gonna kind of make a new pass over what I've just done. Making sure that areas where I want the highest value to be and where I intend to use white chalk, I need to make sure those areas are fully clear of the veil of tone. So it's one law that I abide by in these types of drawings with black and white charcoal on toned paper, is that I create a rule where I cannot mix the charcoal and the white chalk. Because my philosophy is that wherever they would mix and create a value which is half white chalk and half black charcoal, that is the place where the paper already is perfectly representing those values. So we don't need to do anything there. The other thing is that mingling the black and the white charcoal and chalks together, they create a smoky blue coloration to the charcoal and chalk, and it doesn't have a nice color harmony with the rest of the drawing. So we look at a lot of old master drawings where black and white charcoal is used, and we notice that they, for the most part, they tend not to blend the two. There's plenty of exceptions. There are artists that have, and it works out great for them. Like Pierre-Paul Prud'hon, for example, can see a lot of him. You can see him mixing a lot in his drawings, the black and the white charcoal. But he also lets the paper show through in plenty of places. So you can see I'm sneaking up on the value range and turning the form in this hand. And I had lifted out, and then I blended it, and I'm lifting out again. You can repeat this as many times as you like, as much as you need to feel comfortable in arriving at the feeling of turning form that you're after. I've got a lot of flexion folds in the flexed wrist in this area, so and yet it's the wrist of a 10-year-old girl, so I don't want to get too intense with all of the linear disruptions there that occur in the form. I want to squint my eyes as I look at her and see what the cumulative value is of this region where there's a lot of flexion folds building up in the wrist. You can see going to a wider duckbill shape in the eraser is helpful for a larger rate of curvature, like as we get away from the hand and out into the open arm. We want to lift off broader passages like that. So I need a larger scale tool, and the eraser is ready to become that shape, whatever shape you need. Back to the brush. Once I start adding in the white here, as I'm about to do, I find sort of a funny game where I find myself, even though I've done a lot of work so far lifting out the lights, I find myself doing a lot of work revisiting areas and sort of pushing the veil of tone out of the way in order to make way for the white chalk. So here's my white chalk pencil. the Carbothello number 100. I've got it in a charcoal holder. And you can see how I've sharpened it into a really elongated shape. And I'm going to bring my sanding block in and just make it a habit of keeping the white chalk constantly sharp as I work. It's the same with any materials I'm working with, whether it's black or red chalk, graphite pencil, whatever. I just have a habit of making sure it's always sharp. It's never not really sharp. So you need to cultivate a habit of just maintaining the point of it. You know, as a studio instructor, one thing I find myself saying most of the time to students is that, like, the first comment out of my mouth as I make an easel visit is that your pencil's not sharp enough. So we stop. I show them how to sharpen their pencil. So I spend sort of a comic amount of time going over pencil sharpening with people, just because I think that they just don't have the habit in place yet. And the simple truth is that the drawing is much better. The materials are much more versatile when they're sharp. It's really like any tool. It needs to be tuned to do good work. See, I put in the highlight down the proximal link of the pinky. And then immediately what I see is that the light values next door are a little bit too dark now in contrast. So you can see I revisit with the eraser. I create a little bit of transitional zone around the white chalk, and it enables the white to have space to transition away from the highlight and out into the paper, and it won't bump into any areas where there's veil of tone from the vine charcoal. If you're doing this technique and you see a sort of a bluish or smoky gray coloration suddenly, it means that you've mixed the white chalk with the black charcoal. So it creates kind of a problematic effect, because once you see it happening in one place, you feel compelled to make it happen everywhere. And so a lot of my beginning students will turn in assignments where they didn't heed my warnings, and they just have the entire drawing is just a mixture of black and white charcoal. And I point out to them that, you know, what was the point of having the tone paper then? So the tone paper has a purpose, and it's meant to operate as a valid value in the goal of turning the form and creating the sculptural properties of the form that we're representing. So let the paper do the work, if you can, wherever applicable. So I'm starting to turn a roundness into the side of her hand here. And onto that pinky. And I have what I think may be a fairly comprehensive value range for the hand. Let me enter in a few more spots where I know that the white needs to go. And I'm sure that I'll return once again further down the road to all these areas, but I want to see that white in position. It's going to greatly inform my decision making about any of the darker values that are going to come in. So we have a little highlight on each finger, writing on the side plane of the finger, so that the shape of the light abuts the slightly darker tone on the next finger. Again, pay attention to the shape of the highlight. Don't just slap it on. for sort of a quick thrill. I think that I notice my students do think about a highlight as kind of a quick thrill in the drawing, because you can just throw it down in any old place, in any shape, and just kind of make it some brighter value. And for a second, it makes the drawing pop, and you feel a quick thrill. But it's short-lived, because you've got to put the highlight down in the right place and in the right shape and in the right value. These are the brightest values in this hand. Running down the knuckle of the pinky and to this proximal interphalangeal joint. And this value here, side of the ring finger, and these values here. These are our brightest lights in this hand, where we call these highlights, specular reflections. I like to make multiple passes with my chalks and charcoals, so I apply them, a direct rendering of the tone onto the surface like I've been doing off the tip of the pencil. But then I'll blend that with a brush and return later, make another layer of hatching on top of it. But I find that just the hatching alone, just for my tastes these days, it just feels a little too harsh and too unattended to. Don't get me wrong, for years and years and years, I just would hatch only and never blend. I created sort of a dogmatic rule for myself that I had to only hatch the value off the tip of the pencil. No side plane of the pencil, shading, no blending, no smearing with the finger. And I did that for maybe 15 years. But these days, I enjoy the blending of the chalk and then revisiting it with hatching back on top. And again, back to the referencing Pierre-Paul Proudhon. If you look at his figure drawings, you can see he's hatching on the white initially. There's some unfinished areas in some drawings where you can see how he hatches on the white in a really crude hatched, sort of almost like a tic-tac-toe pattern, just kind of placing where the white goes. Then he blends that out really harshly, and then he begins rendering with both chalks in a more refined manner. So you saw I hatched that on, I blended it, now I'm hatching it again. And you can repeat that relationship as much as you want. Let's do a little bit of work with some of the charcoal pencil now. And I've got my charcoal pencil in my holder. This is a Wolf's Carbon pencil. It's a B. And I want to tune it up with my sharpener. So I've got my sharpening block. This block is, as you can see, mostly used for black charcoal pencil. Looks like a little strip of white on the side there was used, but mostly this is for my black charcoal pencil. So I'm keeping this freshly, really sharp. And it'll be the same habits here where I'm gonna render with black charcoal and blend, probably render again, hatch again I should say. So off the tip of this pencil and pressing really lightly, just relying on the sharpness of the pencil to give me really refined behavior. Start to darken the values a little bit. Here's a place where the ring finger casts a shadow onto the middle finger. And so we get a cast shadow here running down the length of the middle finger until it intercepts the form shadow right about here. So there's a form shadow on the middle finger where we see the core shadow running along the terminator edge of the form shadow here. And then this cast shadow comes and meets it. Where the two meet, they become one and the same shadow. Even though they're different types of shadows, they merge together in a way that they become indecipherable from each other. Gonna visit. You can see I'm laying the maul stick here in a way that I can rest my hand like this as I render into these next areas so that I don't have to rest my hand on the drawing. It also, of course, steadies the hand. It's one of the obvious reasons for a maul stick. It both steadies your hand but also enables you to span across vulnerable areas in a painting or a drawing. We have a little shadow shape here riding along this side of the finger. It helps to give some definition, some delineation to the fingers. It's a nice little shadow shape. It's cupping the underside of the condyles of this head of the proximal phalanx for the ring finger. So we gotta think about how that shadow cups the cylinder of bone there. And then it has a little extension that shows us the shape of the base of the intermediate phalanx. So we're seeing even these shadow shapes, when they play out, we're seeing a direct result of the skeletal anatomy inside the hand. And we think about that as we draw these shapes. We're looking for that information. Here, we're seeing the front and underside of those condyles above the head of the proximal phalanx. And so there's a little bit of a double bump to it, a little bit of a dimple there, because we get a double spooled shape there, as we see it typically at the end of a long bone, like kind of like a pirate ship flag with the skull and crossbones, the stereotypical shape of the bones on the flag. We see that shape here at the end of the condyle. Very softly, as I come down the ring finger, we see a form shadow, which has a very delicate core shadow here, because we're receiving a lot of reflected light back from this finger, bouncing over into the shadow mass of this form shadow. So this is a form shadow, but it's filled with lots of reflected light from the neighboring forms. And we could easily miss the fact that it is a shadow. So it's good for the artist to take control and override that and say, I need to show the viewer that this is in fact a shadow shape that I'm looking at. Or I show the viewer that this is a shadow shape that we're looking at. It's something I think about when I'm drawing, is that one aspect of what I'm doing is I'm communicating to somebody, a viewer that I don't that I don't know, a viewer that doesn't know what I'm drawing, hasn't seen it before. And this is the type of communication. It's a description of something in many different ways, not just form and anatomy, but about light. I think it's amazing if we could communicate to the viewer the way the light is behaving on a form. That's one of the most exciting things, I think. Okay, I take little breaks as I go along. Sometimes the blending helps me sort of take a breather. I'm looking for my blending brush here, but I want to just softly work over what I've done. And something we'll see happen right now is that, and it's typical behavior of charcoal pencil, is that when you blend it, it does get a little bit, gets a little bit darker. And so you have to sort of anticipate that that's what's going to happen, that it will deepen in value a little bit. And so if you can kind of predict that and budget out some value for it to darken as you work, that's a good thing. If that shadow shape looks a little red to you, it's because it is. I had been using that brush with some red chalk in a drawing that I'm working on. And I thought that the brush had sort of been cleared out, so I thought I had primed it with black charcoal, but I guess I hadn't. So I'm just tapping out the red chalk essence that I see there, and then just priming the brush with black charcoal dust to override any red that might be in there, and then wiping it out. We can reapply. Well, let's do it in an additive way. I'm going to take the charcoal pencil. I'm going to tickle the tones that sit on the face of that knuckle a little bit with black charcoal again. Okay, so we've established that knuckle. Soft transitions. We're looking for soft transitions. It's such a tightrope act what we're doing here. We're trying to be clear about shapes and deliberate about our shapes. You know, nothing ambiguous or vague, and yet at the same time, we need such soft transitioning. So it's a sort of a ridiculous dichotomy that we strive for. It almost seems impossible. But we go back and forth between softening and then yet clarifying to establish shape. And constantly fighting for clarity of shape as we go along, because the rendering process, and it's the same with painting, developing the painting with paint, both of those processes are ambiguating, meaning we lose specificity as we go along. So we're constantly fighting for and reestablishing clarity of shape, and yet nothing too harsh. We We can't lose softness. We can't lose transition. Okay, so you can see how these fingers are coming out, and I'm gonna let this video just be that. I'm gonna continue to develop the hand further, but you can start to see the form starting to come together a little bit. I always hate to look at the video after this, or the screen rather, because everything looks so harsh on the screen. But on another way of thinking about it is that it's kind of like a blemish mirror. It's very harsh and unforgiving. So if we do look at the video, that camera that I'm working through, or take a picture of your work, you might catch some edits that you need to make that don't show up in real life, but in fact are important things to do. Like, this is looking too harsh to me up here, so I'm visiting it with my eraser. So we'll be looking at that as I go along. But you can see it's a slow, very patient process, and the more patience you can cultivate, the better the results will be. Okay, thanks a lot.